grew up being the one who made things work. Not the oldest, not the loudest, not the one anyone would point to at Thanksgiving and say, "Look at her, she's the glue." But somehow I became the person everyone called when something needed to actually get done. When my cousin needed a co-signer for her first apartment, she called me. When my aunt needed someone to coordinate the logistics for my grandmother's 75th birthday party, the venue deposit, the catering, the cake order, she called me. When things needed money or time or someone who wouldn't flake at the last second, they called me. My name is not on any family plaque. There is no award for being reliable. But for 11 years, I was the one who showed up. I should say up front, I don't come from a wealthy family. Nobody does. My mom worked nights at a hospital for most of my childhood. My dad drove a delivery truck until his back gave out. We weren't poor in the way that makes people uncomfortable to hear about, but we were the kind of family where every dollar had somewhere it already needed to be. So when I got my accounting degree and then my CPA license and started making real money for the first time in my adult life, I felt something I wasn't prepared for. I felt like I owed them. Not in a way anyone said out loud. Nobody sat me down and told me I needed to start contributing more because I was doing well. It was subtler than that. It was my aunt mentioning, almost in passing, that the lake house rental for the family reunion was going to be tight this year. It was my cousin texting me a screenshot of a resort in the Smokies with a little eyes emoji and nothing else. It was my mom saying, you could help with this if you wanted to, no pressure. No pressure. That phrase. I should have seen it for what it was earlier. For 3 summers in a row, I paid for the family vacation. Not part of it. All of it. The rental property, the groceries for the week, the gas for the people who drove, the activities. One summer, I rented a place on the Outer Banks big enough for 14 people. I put $4,200 on my credit card and paid it off over 4 months. I told myself it was fine. I told myself this was what family was for. People help each other, and right now I was in a position to help, so I would. My cousin, I'll call her by her role because that's how I've started to think about her. My cousin was always the center of these trips. She was the one who picked the destinations, who created the group chats, who made the mood boards on Pinterest, and sent them around like we were planning a magazine spread. She had a gift for enthusiasm. She could make anything feel like an event worth attending. She also had a gift for letting other people handle the parts that cost money. Last fall, she announced she was planning a big trip. Not a family reunion exactly, more like a milestone celebration. Her words. She was turning 30 in March, and she wanted to take a group to Nashville for a long weekend. 15 people. A big Airbnb in East Nashville, dinners out, a private bar crawl, the whole thing. She sent a detailed itinerary in a group chat called Brielle's Big 30 Wige, and at the bottom, in small print almost like an afterthought, she wrote, "Elise is handling the logistics. You guys just show up and have fun." I hadn't agreed to handle anything. She called me that same evening. She said she'd already found the perfect Airbnb, a 5-bedroom with a rooftop deck, close to everything, and she'd been holding it with a soft reservation but needed someone to put the deposit down by Friday. She said she just needed me to front it and everyone would pay me back. She said she'd already worked out what everyone owed, and it was so reasonable, like $160 a person, and with 15 people it would basically cover everything. I did the math while she was talking. 160 times 15 was $2,400. The Airbnb alone was going to be more than that, and that wasn't counting the dinners or the bar crawl she'd already been in contact with a company about, or the wine and cheese board she wanted for the first night, or the custom banner she'd mentioned wanting. I should have said something then. I know that now. Instead I said, "Okay, send me the link." I put down $30,200. The Airbnb deposit, the first payment to the bar crawl company, and a preliminary reservation at a restaurant she wanted for the birthday dinner. I told myself it was an advance. I told myself people would pay me back. I told myself my cousin wouldn't do what I already somewhere knew she was going to do. For 8 weeks, I asked about collecting money from people, every week, sometimes twice a week. My cousin was always just about to handle it. She was going to send a Venmo request. She just needed to double-check the numbers. She was going to remind everyone she'd been so busy. She was working on a spreadsheet, she'd send it tonight. She never sent anything. The trip was 6 weeks out when I finally asked her directly, "How much money have you actually collected from people?" She went quiet for a moment and then said that things had come up for a few people, that a couple of the original 15 couldn't make it anymore, that the group was probably going to be closer to 10, and that she was figuring out the numbers. 10 people at $160 a person. That was $1,600. The property alone had cost me more than twice that. I said, "Brielle, I need you to tell me what you've actually collected." She said, "Why are you making this into a thing?" I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. Why are you making this into a thing? As if I had invented the money I'd spent. As if the $3,200 I'd put down was a number I'd made up to cause drama. I want to tell you that I confronted her calmly and we had a productive conversation. I want to tell you it resolved cleanly. But what actually happened is I spent 2 days feeling the specific shame that comes from realizing you've been treated carelessly by someone you love. And then I went back to the group chat and asked everyone directly what they'd sent Brielle toward their share. The responses came in over the next few hours. Out of the remaining 10 people who were supposedly still coming, 3 had sent her money. 1 had sent $60, 1 had sent $80, 1 had sent $120. The other 7 had sent nothing. My cousin had collected $260. I had $3,200 out. She texted me privately that night, not to apologize, to tell me that I was embarrassing her in the group chat and that I needed to stop pressuring people and that if I was going to make this about money, then maybe I shouldn't come on the trip at all. I read that text 3 times. If you're going to make this about money, maybe you shouldn't come. I put my phone face down on the counter. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water and stood there for a while. The bar crawl confirmation email was still open on my laptop. The Airbnb had my name on the reservation. My credit card had a balance I was going to be paying down for months. I picked my phone back up. I typed, "Okay." And then I got to work. The Airbnb cancellation policy was strict. I checked it when I booked, because I'm an accountant and I check things. But I was still inside the window where I could get 70% back if I canceled before a certain date. That date was in 4 days. I went to the platform and I started the cancellation process. My name was on the reservation, my card had been charged, my refund to process. The bar crawl company had a 48-hour cancellation window. I'd booked it 9 weeks out. I called them the next morning and told them there'd been a change in plans. They were gracious about it. Full refund, back within 5 to 7 business days. The restaurant reservation was easy. It was just a reservation. I canceled it online in 40 seconds. Then I left the group chat. Not dramatically. No announcement, no goodbye message, no, "Well, I hope everyone has a great time without me." I just quietly pressed leave group and set my phone down. My cousin called 4 times that evening. I didn't answer. She texted, "Are you serious right now? Then you're being so childish." Then everyone is asking what happened. Then, around midnight, Elise, the Airbnb is gone. What did you do? I didn't respond that night. What I hadn't told anyone, what I'd been sitting on for 2 months because I genuinely didn't know what to do with it, was something I'd seen in October. I'd been helping my aunt sort through some paperwork at her house, the kind of afternoon task that turns into 3 hours because you find boxes you haven't opened since 2014. In one of those boxes, tucked inside a folder of old cards and letters, was a stack of papers that I glanced at and then looked at more carefully. They were loan documents. My cousin had borrowed $8,000 from my grandmother 2 years ago. Not a gift. A loan with a handwritten repayment agreement that my grandmother had made her sign. God, my grandmother was sharper than anyone gave her credit for, with monthly payments of $200 starting 6 months after the loan date. The loan was 2 years old. There had been 4 payments made, total $800. My grandmother, who was 79 and lived on Social Security and a small pension, was owed $7,200 by my cousin, who had just spent 2 months collecting $60 from people for a birthday trip she'd asked someone else to finance. I'd taken a photo of those documents on my phone. I wasn't sure why at the time. I think some part of me knew I was going to need it eventually. The morning after the Airbnb cancellation, I called my grandmother. We talked for a while about ordinary things first. How she was sleeping, whether the physical therapist was helping her knee, what she'd watched on TV the night before. My grandmother has this way of making any conversation feel unhurried. She's never in a rush. I've always loved that about her. Then I said, "Grandma, I want to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me." She said, "I'm always honest with you, baby." I said, "Did Brielle borrow money from you?" There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough. She said, "Where did you hear that?" I told her about finding the paperwork. I told her I hadn't said anything because I wasn't sure it was my place. I told her I was sorry if I was overstepping. And then I told her about the Nashville trip. All of it. The $3,200 I'd fronted. The $260 that had been collected. The text telling me not to come if I was going to make it about money. My grandmother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very calmly, "I've been wondering why she stopped sending the payments." She told me she'd had a hard few months. She said it the way you say something when you've already suspected the truth and have just been waiting for someone to confirm it. I asked her if she wanted me to do anything. She said she needed to think. I said okay. We talked for a few more minutes and then said goodbye. She called my mother that afternoon. My mother called my aunt. My aunt called my cousin. I don't know exactly what was said in those conversations. I wasn't there. What I know is that by that evening my phone was lighting up with texts from family members asking what was going on, and my cousin sent me a message that was 3 paragraphs long, starting with, "I cannot believe you went behind my back," and ending with, "You have always been jealous of me and this proves it." I read it once and didn't respond. 2 days later, my grandmother called me back. She sounded tired, but also, and I know this might sound strange, she sounded a little relieved. She said she'd had a direct conversation with my cousin. She said she'd made clear that the loan needed to be repaid on a real schedule. She said, "She cried a lot, but I'm not as moved by tears as I used to be." I laughed despite myself. My grandmother laughed too. She said, "You didn't do anything wrong, Elise. You found something I should have found myself. Don't let her make you feel guilty for that." The Nashville trip didn't happen. Not for our family, anyway. Without the Airbnb and the bar crawl and the restaurant reservation, there was nothing holding it together. A few people, I heard later, made their own smaller plans. My cousin apparently went with 2 friends from work and rented a hotel room. I hope she had a good time. I genuinely mean that. I booked my own trip, not Nashville. That felt too pointed. I went to Savannah, Georgia, just me, for 4 nights in April. I stayed at a small inn near Forsyth Park, the kind of place with a front porch and rocking chairs and breakfast included. I walked around the squares in the mornings. I ate at restaurants where I didn't have to check in advance whether anyone had dietary restrictions. I bought a book at a used bookstore and read half of it on a bench by the fountain. There was a moment on the 3rd day, sitting outside with coffee in the morning, when I realized I hadn't felt that quiet in years. Not months. Years. I've been thinking about why for a while now. I think the thing that happened in my family, the slow drift toward me being the one who funds things, who coordinates things, who makes sure things actually come together, I don't think it happened because anyone sat down and decided to take advantage of me. I think it happened because I kept saying yes, and because when you keep saying yes, people stop thinking to ask. They just expect. And expectations, once they calcify, feel like obligations on one side and entitlements on the other. I also think, and this is harder to say, that I let it happen because being needed felt like being loved. And I confused the two for a long time. The people who text you when they need something are not the same as the people who think about you when they don't need anything. I know that now in a way I didn't know it 2 years ago. I know it in my body, not just my head. My relationship with my cousin is different now. We text occasionally. It's polite, surface level. I don't think it will go back to what it was, and I've made my peace with that. What it was wasn't actually what I thought it was. My grandmother and I talk every Sunday. That hasn't changed. My mother asked me once, a few months after everything, if I regretted saying anything. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I told her no. I told her that the hardest part wasn't losing the money, though $3,000 is not nothing, and I want to be clear-eyed about that. The hardest part was realizing that I had been building a version of myself around a set of relationships that were not built the same way in return. That's not a comfortable thing to see about your own life. But once you see it, you can't really unsee it, and eventually you're grateful for the clarity. There's a word I've heard in therapy. I started going to therapy last year, which is one of the better decisions I've made. The word is reciprocity. It means the mutual exchange of something. Care, effort, presence, not equal in every single moment because life is uneven and people go through things, but equal over time, balanced in the way that healthy things tend to be. I was not in reciprocal relationships. I was in relationships where I gave and others received, and I had dressed that up in my head as generosity, when really a significant part of it was fear. Fear that if I stopped giving, I would stop belonging. I don't believe that anymore. You can't purchase a place at a table, and you shouldn't have to try. The people who want you there will make room without a transaction. The people who only want you there because of what you bring, they'll show you that too, eventually, if you're willing to look. I'm still learning how to let people show me who they are without immediately trying to fix it or fund it. I'm still learning how to receive care as comfortably as I've always given it. I'm still learning that being alone in Savannah with good coffee and a book and no agenda is not a consolation prize. Some days it still stings. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. But mostly, it feels like the beginning of something I actually want to be part of. I've thought a lot about the word deserve since all of this happened. Not in the way people use it online. Like karma is some vending machine where you put in good behavior and out comes justice. More in the quieter, more uncomfortable sense. What we allow is what we teach people to expect from us. And for a long time, I taught my cousin, I taught a lot of people in my family, that I would keep showing up with my checkbook and my silence, and that there were no real consequences for taking that for granted. That's not anyone else's fault. That's mine. And sitting with that honestly was harder than canceling the Airbnb ever was. What I've come to believe is that there's a version of generosity that comes from a genuinely full place, from real abundance, real love, real choice. And then there's a version that comes from fear. Fear of being left out. Fear of being seen as difficult. Fear that if you stop being useful, you stop being wanted. I was practicing that second kind for years and calling it the first. That distinction matters. It took me a long time to see it clearly, and I only saw it because something finally made the cost visible. Brielle didn't set out to be cruel. I actually believe that. But intentions don't cancel impact, and the pattern she'd fallen into, letting someone else carry the financial weight while keeping all the social credit, that pattern only existed because I never interrupted it. The moment I did, everything became visible. The loan from my grandmother. The $260 collected out of $3,200 spent. The text telling me not to come if I was going to make it about money. None of that was new information. It had all been true for a while. I just finally stopped looking away. There's something worth naming about what my grandmother did too. She was 79 years old, living carefully on a fixed income, and she had quietly lent $8,000 to her granddaughter and then said nothing when the payments stopped. Not because she was naive, she was the one sharp enough to write up a repayment agreement in the first place. I think she said nothing because she didn't want to cause a rupture. She was protecting a version of peace that was costing her more than she let on. When I called her, she didn't fall apart. She just exhaled. Sometimes the people we think need protecting are actually just waiting for someone to finally say the thing out loud. That's the part I keep returning to. Honesty. Real honesty, not cruelty dressed up as honesty, but the plain and clear kind, is not the thing that breaks relationships. It's the thing that reveals which relationships were already broken. The ones that can hold truth tend to get stronger. The ones that can't were always going to fall eventually. I didn't destroy anything with that phone call to my grandmother. I just stopped helping hold together something that was already coming apart. I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not the person who fixes things. That identity ran deep, but Savannah helped. 4 days of being nobody's coordinator, nobody's bank, nobody's backup plan. That helped more than I expected. I came home a little quieter and a little more certain of something I'd always intellectually known, but never quite felt, that I am worth being around even when I'm not being useful. That's the thing I'd want anyone to take from this, if anything. Not the cancelled bookings or the group chat exit or any of the satisfying logistical details. Just that. You are allowed to stop funding what doesn't value you, and when you do, you find out very quickly what was real and what was just an arrangement.